Well, have you ever been in a relationship, gone outside, done literally anything ever as a human being? Well, if you have, you've probably noticed that men and women are very different from one another. Last May, the Obama administration announced a new rule requiring every public school in the country to let transgender students use whichever bathroom or locker room matched their preferred gender identity. Well, yesterday, the Trump administration retracted that rule, saying that bathroom policies like these are state issues and shouldn't be set by the decrees of 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue. Zach Pecanis is a senior advisor to the DNC and helms their Trump war room. This morning on Twitter, he called President Trump a monster for reverting to the policy in place just 1 year ago. This policy has implications that go far beyond bathrooms and locker rooms. The core question is what constitutes male and female. And the implication of these guidelines that Obama put in place is that a man is someone who says he's a man, and a woman is someone who says she's a woman. You get to decide your gender. There's no biological anchor to sex anymore. It's all determined by the individual. So my obvious question for you is, how do I know if a person's male or female? Is there some other absolute standard that people have to meet to be male or female, other than what they say?
One's gender identity is enough to show what gender they are. And so if you're confused about that, I mean, I leave that, to your level of enlightenment.
This is one of the most profound changes, I think, in the history of the West, the redefinition of sex from a biological reality to a social construct, and it's had a lot of implications. What are some of them?
Well, I think a lot of people like you are sort of wondering how it is that they woke up and, for example, we're talking about requiring women to register for the draft, or seeing toys banned from their classroom for gender equity reasons, or wondering why it is that we're sending mothers of young children into combat and calling it equality. And I think a lot of us can see that, if anything, the ramifications are very unequal, especially for women.
I'm a 47-year-old man. I think that's pretty obvious. If I were to decide tomorrow that I was a 47-year-old woman, should I be allowed to go shower in a women's locker room?
The idea that there's no objective factors to be considered in who is transgender and how we determine bathroom use is really not the way that this works.
But what if I did decide tomorrow? Should I be, and it was totally sincere? Or, by the way, how would you know whether it was sincere or not, or anyone know? Only I can make that decision. And what if I did? Would I be allowed to go and shower in a women's locker room? And if not, why not? This is a real question because there are all kinds of institutions in American life that function on a sex-segregated basis. Women's college, sports, both professional and amateur. If your sex is what you say it is, then what prevents me from playing on a women's field hockey team? What prevents me from getting convicted of a felony and demanding to go to a women's prison? And it's a real question.
It's not a real question.
Why is it not a real question?
It's not a real question because it is pretty absurd.
I just want to know what the standards are. I'm not actually making any claims. I'm merely asking a question, and I want you to answer.
Yes, the standards are
Is there a scientific standard? Because when you deal with questions of biology, that is a species of science. So what's the scientific standard? I'm a scientist. I want to know if you're a man or a woman. How do I find out?
Look, these are discussions that I encourage you to have with someone who is transgender.
It's a very simple question.
Yes.
I want to know if you're a man or a woman. I'm a scientist. How do I find out?
Your gender identity determines your gender, period.
Okay. So what exactly are the standards? And are they legal standards, or are they standards that you agree with? I mean, what exactly are the actual standards? Because, again, a lot of money is at stake here.
Yes. Well, the medical standards require seeing a therapist for a certain period of time before cross-sex hormones will be prescribed, a certain amount of time living as the opposite sex before certain kinds of medical treatment and surgery will be permitted. The other thing to keep in mind is that the courts have been parsing this for the last 15, 20 years.
So should someone who looks like me, I look like a man, you think I was a man, I say I'm a woman, and I demand to play in a women's sports team, I demand to go to women's college, I demand a Small Business Administration loan for women-owned businesses. That's a real thing. That's a billion-dollar question, for real. Can you turn me down if I say I'm a woman?
Gender identity determines one's gender.
Let me ask you
period. This. This is a matter of civil rights.
You still haven't explained, and I've asked you a bunch, what the legal standards are, because I don't think that there are any, and here's why that's a concern. So the federal government spends over $11 billion every year on sex-specific programs, and I'm sure you know what they are. The Small Business Administration, among many others, gives a ton of money to people because they are women. And so How are we supposed to navigate that if there, and let's be honest with each other, there are no standards actually, other than I say that I'm of a different sex. How are we supposed to navigate this, and what's going to prevent charlatans from jumping in and taking all that cash?
Well, let me give you an example. In the field of athletics, there are standards that have been developed for when someone is permitted to move into a particular single-sex activity. It involves how long they've been on hormones, how long their transition has been, you know, whether or not they have the strength equivalent to, you know, that, like in women's sports, for example.
That's not true. There isn't. The WNBA doesn't have the same standard as the Olympics, as Notre Dame women's field hockey. I mean, there is no absolute standard.
Well, if that's what you're saying, is there an absolute standard? You're correct.
Yeah.
There is not an absolute standard. We are working this out as a society. It doesn't mean put transgender people back in the closet or tell transgender youth just, you know, fend for yourself.
But nobody's suggesting that, at least on this show. What I'm suggesting is an adult look at this issue, and yet whenever you bring it up, like, what does this really mean? And can you actually change your sex biologically? You're denounced as, you know, as like a hater. And I'm just speaking for myself when I say that has nothing to do with it. I think it's fair to ask these questions. And so when are we going to find out exactly what it means to be a woman or a man?
This is where you're seeing social conservatives and radical left-wing feminists actually line up together, because they're saying that women are threatened in a world where women can't make claims on the basis of being a woman because male and female are invalid.
If I can be a woman simply by saying I am, then what's special about women?
Well, and even more so, I mean, how can women make claims on the basis of their sex if we're now going to say that sex is not a valid category, that this is an arbitrary label assigned at birth?
Is there science behind this? Because I know that I'm often getting...
Science.
Really,
Absolutely science behind it.
I want you to name a single scientist, just one, who says you can determine your own sex just by saying so. Can you name one scientist who says that?
I'd be happy to send you many after.
A scientist who said you can determine your own sex, an actual scientist, like someone who went to college.
Listen,
Are you serious?
You clearly have some issues around this.
It's not an issue at all. I have questions that you can't answer. And you're instead throwing things like you're not enlightened. I'm asking you a sincere question. What's the science behind this? And you're deflecting. Why?
I'm simply not deflecting. This is a matter of settled science, and it is something.
What's the science exactly? That you are what you say you are? Could I change my race too? And don't dodge that question. That's a real question.
No, you cannot.
Why?
Change
Why
your race.
can't I change my race, but I can change my sex? What's the difference?
It is not about changing. It is not about changing.
But why
This
isn't
is about
it?
Inherently who people are.
Really? What if I say I'm inherently of another race? Who are you to say I'm not? I often hear people on the left say, you know, I believe in science. I listen to NPR. I believe in science. I drive a Subaru. Is the idea that sex is purely a social construct and not a biological reality, is that rooted in science?
Your sex is literally established from the moment of conception. That is a very basic biological medical reality. And if you read, say, medical textbooks, they're going to talk about your sex in very plain scientific terms. And society is going in a completely different direction.
So there aren't a lot of scientists who say, you know, sex is not, your gender's not real. It's just you can assign it to yourself and it's totally valid.
And in fact, you know, I have 2 little kids, and even my pediatrician the other day was sort of like, this is I don't really know how to handle this. They're making our jobs impossible to do because we're looking at the facts, and the facts, you know, biology is very sort of self-evident, but that's become politically incorrect.
Yeah, the rest of us are required to lie at gunpoint, basically.